Hello, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel, Dan Levy, reporter for Bloomberg News on troubles in the Napa Valley wine industry, and Jill Tucker, staff writer with the San Francisco Chronicle on California's lowest performing schools. Josh Richman, legal and political affairs reporter for the Oakland Tribune on politics. And by phone from the state Republican convention in Santa Clara, John Myers, Sacramento bureau chief for KQED Public Radio. John Myers, the Republican Party seems to be energized. So what is the mood down there so far?
Well, Belva, they are excited here in Santa Clara, but I mean, that's what conventions are all about. They are for the party faithful to rally around their causes, and that's certainly no different here this weekend. What's really interesting, though, is the top two races in November, the governor's race and the Senate race. They're the only contested primaries in California, and so they're really the only game around. But I think what's really going to be fascinating through this weekend and the next few weeks is this issue of who's conservative enough, the conservative litmus test, who really appeals to the party faithful. And you've got that fight being fought in both races, Steve Poizner and Meg Whitman in the governor's race, and all three candidates in the Senate race, Tom Campbell, Carly Fiorina, Chuck DeVore. It's going to be an interesting weekend to see who's got the hearts and minds of the Republican faithful.
You just went through something that is kind of phenomenal. Tell us about that.
Phenomenal in that I got to talk to Meg Whitman one-on-one for a few minutes. Yeah, there was, the Whitman campaign had a horrible week in PR terms, and I think a lot of people would realize that, where they had an event on Tuesday in Oakland where they invited the press and they didn't let the press ask questions. They got national scorn for that. And so Meg Whitman's been talking to reporters today. She spoke to print reporters for about 45 minutes. I had about 10, 15 minutes with her one-on-one where we talked about her budget plans. And, they say they're going to change that. But that's a huge thing because that perception becomes reality that she doesn't want to talk about the issue. She just wants to run TV commercials. They know they've got to fight that back.
And in this battle to outflank each other on the right, how are Whitman and Poizner being received down there by the delegates so far? What are you seeing of the way that they're interacting with the delegates?
Well, I think it's still early, and we're waiting for the Whitman speech here on Friday night in front of the delegates. I mean, she really is trying to stress her fiscal conservatism. She says fiscal issues are all that matter in the bad economy in California. Poizner says he's conservative in everything. And, of course, Poizner's had a bit of an evolution of some of his thoughts on conservative issues. But, the social issues are not that far behind here. I mean, what's fascinating is the same issues we've talked about year after year have come back. A line of people with signs outside the convention hall about Meg Whitman and her stance on being pro-choice, and they are anti-abortion groups critical of her. Steve Poizner talking about cutting off all services for undocumented immigrants, shades of Prop 187 again. So similar social, big cultural, emotional fights over who's conservative enough.
Just in terms of the polls, John, how much ground does Poizner have to make up? I mean, isn't he down by a considerable number of points in the polls?
Yeah, I mean, most polls say, 30 points or so. I mean, Poizner says, well, the old adage, I've not yet begun to fight, wait till I roll my TV ads out. But again, it's that perception becomes reality in politics, and Poizner really has, I think, a real targeted chance here, a window to get in this race and make it clear this convention and a debate in Orange County Monday night where he really has to put Whitman back in the corner to try to fight, these millions and millions of dollars of TV and radio ads.
So, John, are they looking this weekend, the candidates that are there, are they looking for sort of broad appeal? Are they really focused on these party faithful that are there to really galvanize that core support and then go out to the broader state? What are they hoping to get out of this convention?
Well, I think that every convention has to appeal to that party faithful, Republicans and Democrats alike, and there's always that time-honored adage of tacking left or right, depending on your party, and then moving back to the center for a general election. I will say I think Meg Whitman is not tacking to the right as much as Steve Poizner. I think she is giving a nod to some of the differences she has with the party, but she's trying to look to the general election. You can feel that in those television ads. She wants to take on Jerry Brown. Her speech tonight, making fun of his nickname, Governor Moonbeam, making fun of how liberal he is, making fun of his failed record, she says, in all of his jobs. I mean, she's looking to the general election. The question is, do the party faithful, are they willing to take a chance on someone who may not toe the line on every issue they care about?
Let's think about who's not there. The governor's not there, but Mitt Romney is supposed to be there, and the Tea Party is supposed to arrive tomorrow.
Yeah, the Tea Party rally on Saturday afternoon. Mitt Romney, who actually Meg Whitman used to work for in the business world, speaking with her tonight. A lot of appealing to those red meat conservative issues. But yeah, my favorite line about where the moderates are at the party, who's the leader of the moderate wing of the Republican Party, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He left the state on Friday, so he's not here.
Well, let's turn to another big move in politics this week, one that's not happening down there with you, but Josh, you know a bit about what Gavin Newsom's planning to do.
Yes, Gavin Newsom just a couple of months ago laughed when somebody suggested he might drop out of the governor's race and run for lieutenant governor instead. Then a week later, he dropped out of the governor's race, saying that he needed to spend more time with his young family and serving the citizens of San Francisco as mayor. And today he got into the lieutenant governor's race. Which is not good news for the one person who was leading the Democratic primary for the lieutenant governor so far, Los Angeles Councilwoman Janice Hahn, who coincidentally was here in the Bay Area campaigning today. She says she welcomes the attention that this brings to the race. I don't think she welcomes the fact that at least one poll shows Newsom entering the race as a front runner, and he comes in with some heavy endorsements, including Nancy Pelosi, John Perez, the new Assembly Speaker, Darrell Steinberg, the State Senate President pro tem, and some heavy hitter unions as well.
Mm-hmm. He definitely came out swinging today, saying that he doesn't want to be the average lieutenant governor. He wants to go there and bring what he accomplished in San Francisco to Sacramento. He has this these huge ideas that he wants to implement across the state. Is that going to mean anything to voters?
Well, that's what every candidate for lieutenant governor says, because a lot of voters are not entirely clear on what the lieutenant governor does. The fact is, lieutenant governor is influential in terms of the boards and commissions that he or she sits on and appoints people to. Things like the UC Board of Regents, the CSU Board of Trustees, the State Lands Commission, stuff like that. So there is impact that a person can have. Both Hahn and Newsom are basically preaching the same line, which is they are experienced municipal officials who are going to bring the concerns of local government to this job and would be able to represent Californians very strongly there.
Hey, Josh, wouldn't you say that one of the issues that Newsom has got to deal with is this issue of does he have the fire in the belly for this race? I mean, in addition to all the public statements he made making fun of the lieutenant governor's race, he's not known to be a big fan of raising money, which is important in statewide campaigns. He gave an interview to the New York Times where he just said, I think I'm done with politics. I mean, how does he's got to get across that hurdle, it seems somewhat.
Yeah, I think Dianne Feinstein had said that she was done with politics in like 1978, and you see how that turned out. Newsom's not going to have to do a lot of personal fundraising in this race because he already has some big unions and some big Democratic establishment figures behind him. Going into the general election, he's likely to what he's got facing him on the Republican side, of course, as you know, is Sam Amistad is running, state senator from Grass Valley is running, and Abel Maldonado, maybe will be confirmed by then and maybe going in as the incumbent.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I must say, though, that the Republicans really have the lights shining on them this weekend down there where you are, John. We want to thank you for sharing with us, and we'll let you get back to the action there.
Thanks a lot, Belva.
Well, whoever's elected to whatever office will have to deal with education in this state. And now there are 188 schools on a list this week that says that they're some of the lowest performing schools in the state. Many of them are here in the Bay Area. So, Jill Tucker, what criteria is used when choosing or selecting out these schools that are the lowest performing?
Well, mostly what the state was looking at when they put these schools on the worst list in the state is standardized test scores. That was the vast majority of what they were looking at was how these kids at these schools did on standardized tests. Now, remember though, these schools are all Title I schools. That means that in order to even be considered for this list, you had to be eligible for Title I funds or receiving Title I funds.
And explain Title I.
Meaning that you have the majority low-income students in these schools. So right off the bat, you can eliminate any schools with middle-class kids who may be doing just as poorly, not common, but nonetheless possible, that weren't even considered for the list. So this list is looking at a very select group of schools with low-income kids with low test scores.
And then there are ways to get off that list, aren't there? There are some ways to sort of game the system a little bit, right?
Yeah, there was after this list came out on Monday, they revised it a little bit on Thursday or yesterday, but there was a lot of screaming and yelling from some of the schools on this list saying, we're not that bad. We may be kind of bad, but we're not that bad. And that's because the criteria that they used for this list looked at certain things, looked at it a certain way. If you were a school, you could have some of the lowest test scores, but if you had improvement over the last 3 years, then you weren't considered significant improvement, but nonetheless, you wouldn't be on this list.
That's why they were on the worst schools, is because they improved, right? Isn't generally the case that schools could be doing better and need to be motivated somehow to get better?
Right. So, I mean, that's the idea of this, that the schools on this list are doing poorly, haven't showed any improvement, and despite years of testing and other types of reform that have been out there, and that nothing seems to be working for these schools. I think there's probably schools in the state that are worse than these schools that somehow didn't make this list. But in general, nobody's going to argue that that there's any schools on this list that are doing really well with the students that they have in their schools.
Maybe that's why this whole idea of some sort of national standards is catching on, would you say?
Yeah, you know, they did release a draft of what they're calling Common Core standards. They want all the states, if possible, to be teaching the same rigorous things to students at each grade level. It was interesting, though, because California has always been considered to have really high standards in each grade level. We start teaching algebraic concepts in kindergarten here. And so when these standards came out and California got a peek at them, they sort of raised their hand and said, actually, ours are harder, especially for math. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be some debate about whether those standards are going to help California boost their students. But in general, people are going to be looking at these schools in particular and schools across California to see if what they're requiring these schools to do, which are major, major reforms, starting with get rid of the principal or shut the doors or turn into a charter school. And there's going to be a lot of pushback from families who love their principal, from families who love their school despite the test scores. But it is the federal government has put a lot of money behind this. California has demanded that the schools make these changes. They're tired of schools not performing and these children failing. Mm. And it's going to be interesting in the fall.
So there is a benefit, as Dan said. They will get money. They'll get a lot of assistance. So their opportunities for improvement will be increased.
Yes, there is. California has about $416 million that they could distribute to these 188 schools. The way I calculated that was an average $2 million each over 3 years. Some schools will get as much as $6 million over 3 years. So there's a decent amount of money that goes with this.
Well, money is really the thing that is turning the key to our next story, and that's Dan Levy's story, and it's about the Napa Valley and about the recession and how rough it's been for people in the wine industry, especially at the high end of it. Not only are they dealing with money, but now there is an invasive moth in today's story that's affecting some of the vineyards. But the economy is a real question, right?
I think so. I think more than the moth, the economy is definitely what's got people in Napa talking. Napa is the premier wine region and the premier wine state in the United States. So when the data came out that defaults, which lead to foreclosure, and many times in Napa County, were up four times the last 2 years on wineries and vineyards, that was a sign that things may not be so rosy in wineland.
So is it the land? Is it the changing taste? I mean, is it the real estate that's losing value, or is it the changing taste of the public?
That's what's driving everything. The recession, one of the analysts that I talked to for our story said that it's a secular change. It's a once-in-a-generational change. People are trading down. Things got too expensive. Now people are trading down. Wall Street traders, bankers, lawyers, everybody thinks that cheap is chic. That's a bit of a generalization because a lot of wealthy people still have a lot of money and will still spend on these luxury items like wine. But generally, the trend is to spend less if you're a consumer.
So did we have a sort of a wine bubble that it's the way we had a housing bubble? People are just not going to pay what they used to pay for wine anymore?
I think that's not a bad way to look at it. I mean, there was a bubble in any aspect of the economy where you had to borrow money, including for wineries and for grapeland in Napa County. So whether you're real estate in office buildings or housing or hotels or whatever, real estate in Napa Valley got up very high in values. And now the estimate is they're at least down 15%. in Napa, and it's really an early stage of the process where the unwinding will take place, and we'll see. The Napa County Assessor, I should say, announced after this story came out that he would review all assessments after 2002. So that gives you an idea of where the assessor thinks the credit bubble may have started. And any assessment done after 2002 will be reviewed in Napa.
Can I just ask, though, there seems to have been for a while now a trend in wine that you can get really good wine and not pay the premium price. So it isn't so much, people have been spending less, sure, for the recession, but I think that they've been realizing for a while that you don't have to spend $100 a bottle. You can get a really good bottle of wine for $10. So did these Napa wineries not maybe see that writing on the wall and follow that trend a little bit more?
That's a very good point. A lot of cheaper imports from places like Chile and Argentina have kind of undercut some of the premium American brands. And maybe now is the moment where that sort of day of reckoning will come for these very expensive bottles. Do they cut their price? And once they cut, it's very hard to come back up.
Their business models are based upon those prices that they've been trying to get their customers to pay. So that's where the squeeze comes in.
That's
they
right.
can't just say, we'll cut the price in half and stay in business.
Well, if you had a business that's been 10 or 15 or 20 years in the making, you probably have some wiggle room. If you're a new arrival, like many people rushed into the Napa wine, they wanted the lifestyle, it was going to be great to make wine. If you were there, say, after 2005, you might have some troubles.
What was the impact of, I'll call it $2 Chuck, the wine that was touted so as being very good for just $2?
Yeah, that was a pre-recession thing that happened, but I think it's part of the same basic trend of there being better, cheaper wine out there and consumers being more sophisticated. And, as the wine market has grown over the last 20 years, tastes have gotten more sophisticated, and now consumers have $2 Chuck, they have the Sauvignon Blanc from Chile, or they have a less expensive bottle from Lake County, or the Central Coast, something like that. So it's all part of the same mix.
Yeah, in just a second, is this applying to wineries all over the world, all over the country, or just here?
The credit bubble was global in nature, so we might see this other places as well. Australia, by the way, has a huge grape glut right now, so we might see some price reductions there too.
All right. Well, my thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight.